David and Laura McMillan seemed like the perfect couple, successful, devoted, and deeply in love. But when David's hunger for excitement led him to share his wife in what he called a harmless fantasy, their marriage slipped into something far darker. What began as trust turned to obsession, and within months, the man who claimed to love Laura more than life itself would take that life away, proving that sometimes the most dangerous place a woman can be is in the home she thought was safe. David McMillan had always been the kind of man people described as charming. He smiled easily, spoke softly, and had a way of making others feel at ease. To anyone looking from the outside, his marriage to Laura seemed ideal. Two professionals with a nice home in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. They hosted dinners, went on weekend trips, and were often seen walking their golden retriever together. But beneath the warmth and smiles, their marriage had begun to cool. After 12 years, the spark had faded into routine, and routine had turned into silence. David felt invisible, and Laura felt trapped. The change had started small. David began spending more time online, wandering into late-night forums where people shared stories about unconventional relationships and fantasies. At first, it was curiosity, something to fill the emptiness he didn't want to admit existed. But those conversations quickly turned into something deeper. He found validation there, excitement, the feeling of being seen. And the more he read, the more he became convinced that their marriage could be saved if only they were willing to open it. When David first brought it up, Laura thought he was joking. She laughed it off, but he didn't. He spoke about trust, about sharing experiences that would bring them closer together. She resisted for weeks, but David's persistence wore her down. He framed it as an act of love, of honesty. He told her it would strengthen their bond, that they would be doing it together, not apart. Eventually, exhausted and desperate to save what they had left, Laura agreed. She told herself it was harmless, a single experience that would stay between them. They planned everything carefully, who it would be, where it would happen, and how they would make sure it didn't go too far. But plans have a way of collapsing once emotion enters the equation. On that night, as David watched Laura with another man, something in him shifted. He had expected to feel excitement, maybe jealousy, but what he felt instead was something much darker. He couldn't stop watching her face, studying every smile, every glance, every touch. It felt as if she had disappeared from him completely and belonged to someone else, even though it was his idea. Afterward, Laura wanted to move on, to treat it as a mistake they'd never repeat. But for David, it became the only thing he could think about. The memory replayed in his mind like a loop he couldn't escape. He started analyzing every detail: how long she looked at the man, how she laughed, how relaxed she seemed. He began to ask questions he didn't want answered. Did she like it more than she said? Was there something between them? Had she been pretending all along? His thoughts grew darker, feeding off each other until suspicion took over. He began checking her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her messages, searching for proof that she was still in contact with the man. There was nothing, but that only made him more paranoid. In his mind, the absence of evidence became proof of how well she was hiding it. David's behavior began to change. He withdrew from friends, avoided eye contact, and started working late hours just to avoid being home. When Laura tried to talk to him, he barely responded. He told her everything was fine, but his eyes said otherwise. She began to feel uneasy, unsure if she even recognized the man she had married. One evening, Laura came home to find David sitting in the dark living room, staring at the wall. He told her he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, that it didn't feel right anymore. She tried to comfort him, but her words only deepened his bitterness. He started asking questions again, the same ones he had asked before, but this time his tone was different, accusing, cold. Laura went to bed in tears that night, realizing their marriage was crumbling under the weight of something that was supposed to bring them closer. Over the next few weeks, David's paranoia turned into obsession. He began following Laura to work, convinced she was meeting someone during her lunch breaks. He checked the mileage on her car, the timestamps on her emails, even the way she dressed each morning. Every action became evidence in his mind that she was betraying him. The fantasy that had once excited him had twisted into a nightmare he couldn't escape. And yet, to everyone else, David seemed calm, polite, even normal. No one suspected that inside his mind, jealousy and rage were quietly building towards something irreversible. What had begun as a shared fantasy meant to reignite love was now the match that would set everything ablaze. The night they thought would save their marriage had instead created the moment that would destroy it forever. The weeks after that night turned into a blur of tension and suspicion. Laura tried to act as if life could return to normal, but David's eyes followed her everywhere. His voice was soft when he spoke, but there was a tightness underneath it, a quiet anger that made her uneasy. He began to question everything she did, where she went, who she called, even how long she stayed in the shower. What had once been love had morphed into quiet surveillance. Laura told herself he just needed time, that the jealousy would fade. But David's obsession only deepened. He began staying up late, scrolling through her social media, creating fake accounts to watch her interactions. He installed tracking software on her phone without her knowing. Every morning before she woke up, he checked her messages, convincing himself she was hiding something. When he couldn't find proof, he created it in his mind. He believed she had grown distant because of guilt, not because of fear. At work, David's behavior became erratic. His coworkers noticed he was distracted, staring at his phone between tasks, muttering under his breath. One afternoon, a friend asked if everything was okay, and David smiled too widely, saying he was just tired. But the truth was far more dangerous. He was consumed by the thought that Laura had fallen for the man they had invited into their marriage. He started visiting places where he thought she might meet this man, even though there was no evidence of any ongoing contact. He sat in his car outside her workplace, watching the parking lot for hours. When Laura stayed late one evening for a team project, David convinced himself she was lying. He followed her home, headlights off, watching as she pulled into their driveway alone. Yet instead of being relieved, he grew angrier. He imagined that she was clever enough to hide it from him now, that she had found ways to deceive him completely. Laura noticed the shift. The warmth in David's eyes was gone. He had become cold, silent, almost mechanical. She found hidden cameras disguised as smoke detectors in their bedroom and a small recorder beneath the couch. When she confronted him, David insisted it was for safety, that he just wanted peace of mind. But Laura saw the truth. He no longer trusted her. The man she had once loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw her as an enemy. The discovery broke something in her. She began making quiet plans to leave. She spoke to her sister, told her she was scared but didn't give details. She packed a small overnight bag and waited for the right moment. The morning she finally left, she told David she was visiting her sister for a few days. He nodded without expression, but his mind was already racing. He didn't believe her. That night, he drove to her sister's house, parking across the street. He sat in the car for hours, watching the lights inside. He saw Laura through the window, laughing, relaxed, finally free. And that image ignited something irreversible inside him. To him, her laughter wasn't relief. It was proof. Proof that she was happy without him. Proof that she had been pretending all along. Over the next few days, David's thoughts grew darker. He told himself that if she had truly betrayed him, he deserved to know. He started calling her, leaving messages filled with apologies, pleading for her to come home, promising to change. But when she didn't answer, his tone shifted. The calls became colder, shorter, filled with silence between words. Laura, trying to protect herself, decided she would go back one last time to collect her things and end things properly. Her sister begged her not to, sensing danger, but Laura believed David wouldn't harm her. She thought he was hurt, not dangerous. She believed he was still the man she married beneath all the anger. That decision would be her last mistake. On the evening she returned, David was waiting. He had been preparing for days, rehearsing every moment in his head. He told himself it would just be a conversation, a way to make her understand how deeply she had hurt him. But deep down, he knew he wanted something more permanent. He couldn't bear the thought of her leaving him again. He couldn't bear the thought of her belonging to anyone else. As Laura parked her car in front of their house, David watched from the window. The porch light cast a shadow across his face, his expression unreadable. To him, this was not the end of their marriage. It was the moment he would finally take back control. And when the door closed behind her, the line between love and obsession disappeared forever. Laura's car was still parked in the driveway the next morning, but she was nowhere to be found. Her sister, alarmed that she hadn't called or returned home, tried reaching her phone all day. It went straight to voicemail. By evening, worry turned into panic. She called the police, explaining that Laura had gone to her husband's house the night before and never came back. Officers arrived at the McMillan home around midnight. David answered the door calmly, wearing the same gray sweatshirt he'd been seen in the previous evening. He looked tired, but not surprised. He told the police Laura had stopped by to pick up some clothes, that they'd talked for a while, and she left shortly after. He even invited them inside, showing them the tidy living room, the spotless kitchen, and the faint scent of bleach that hung in the air. It was all too clean, unnaturally clean. The officers noted it, but didn't press too hard that night. David seemed cooperative, even emotional. He promised to help however he could. For the next few days, David played the role of the heartbroken husband. He joined the search efforts, handed out flyers, and stood beside Laura's sister at press conferences, urging anyone with information to come forward. He told neighbors he barely slept, that he just wanted her safe. His voice cracked in interviews, his eyes glassy with what appeared to be grief. But behind closed doors, David was methodical. He deleted files, scrubbed surfaces, and disposed of items he thought might connect him to what had happened. It didn't take long for investigators to sense something was off. David's story had small inconsistencies that didn't fit together. He said Laura left around 9:30 p.m., yet a neighbor's security camera caught her car still parked outside nearly an hour later. He also claimed he hadn't left the house that night, but his truck was seen driving down a rural road on a traffic camera at 11:47 p.m. When detectives confronted him, he said he went out to clear his head. Forensic teams were brought in to search the house more thoroughly. What they found changed everything. Under the carpet in the garage, technicians noticed faint discoloration. When tested, it came back positive for traces of blood. In the corner, they found a roll of plastic tarp matching the type used by construction workers. New, unopened, except for one missing section. They also found a single gold earring under the workbench, one that Laura's sister later confirmed belonged to her. David's calm demeanor began to fracture. Detectives noticed how his voice shook slightly each time they mentioned Laura's name. He still insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance, claiming she might have left on her own. But the evidence told a different story. A receipt from a gas station 2 hours away surfaced. Bleach, rope, and gloves purchased the night Laura vanished. Security footage showed a man matching David's build making the purchase. When confronted with this, he said it wasn't him, that it must have been a coincidence. The breakthrough came 4 days later when a search team found a fresh trail of disturbed soil off a secluded hiking path near Mount Hood National Forest. It was an area David knew well. He had taken Laura there for picnics early in their marriage. Beneath the shallow layer of dirt, wrapped in a gray tarp and bound with rope, was Laura's body. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The woman who had once been seen as the heart of their quiet neighborhood had been murdered by the man everyone thought adored her. The medical examiner's report confirmed she had died from strangulation. There were bruises on her arms, suggesting she had tried to fight back. There were also traces of bleach on her clothing, indicating an attempt to destroy evidence. When detectives confronted David with the findings, his mask finally began to crack. His eyes darted around the interrogation room, his hands trembling slightly. He muttered that it had been a mistake, that he never meant for it to go that far. But when asked to explain what happened, he went silent. The police obtained a search warrant for his devices, uncovering a series of disturbing notes. In his private journal, David had written about feeling replaced, about wanting to make Laura see him again. His words grew increasingly violent as the entries went on. The final one, written the day before Laura returned home, read, "If I can't fix this, I'll end it my way." That line became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. David McMillan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As officers led him away from the house, neighbors watched in silence. Unable to reconcile the friendly man who once waved from his driveway with the killer he had become, that Laura's family never got the chance to say goodbye. Her sister later said that the hardest part wasn't knowing how she died. It was realizing that the person Laura had trusted most was the one who took her life. What began as a desperate attempt to save a marriage had turned into a cold-blooded act of control. The fantasy that was supposed to bring them closer had ended with a grave in the woods and a man whose obsession destroyed everything it touched. David McMillan's arrest marked the end of a long and painful search, but for investigators, it was only the beginning of uncovering the full picture of what had really happened. The story gripped the public. A husband who once presented himself as gentle and devoted was now accused of murdering his wife in cold blood. Every news outlet ran the same photo of David and Laura smiling at a neighborhood barbecue, their faces frozen in a moment of happiness that now felt disturbingly hollow. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Reporters filled every seat, their pens ready as David sat motionless in his gray suit, staring straight ahead. He looked thinner than before, older, as though the weight of what he had done was pressing down on him. But behind his stillness, there was no trace of remorse. The prosecution laid out a chilling timeline. They described how David's obsession had built over months, his growing paranoia, the secret recordings, and the controlling behavior that had escalated until the night Laura died. They showed the jury the receipts, the gas station footage, and the messages Laura had sent to her sister days before her murder. In one of them, she wrote that she didn't feel safe but wanted to believe David could change. Those words echoed in the courtroom, followed by a silence heavy with heartbreak. Then came the physical evidence. Forensic experts detailed the traces of blood found under the carpet, the bleach stains, and the matching tarp discovered near her body. The prosecution showed images of the shallow grave and explained how David's phone had pinged in that same area on the night of the murder. Each piece connected seamlessly, painting a picture of premeditation rather than an accident. The defense tried to counter by suggesting that Laura's death was unintentional, that an argument had turned violent in the heat of emotion. They described David as a man pushed to the edge, tormented by jealousy and heartbreak. They insisted he had only wanted to talk, that things spiraled out of control when she refused to listen. But no amount of explanation could soften the brutality of the act. The evidence spoke louder than any excuse could. Throughout the trial, Laura's family sat in the front row, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Her sister refused to look away, even when the most painful details were read aloud. She wanted David to see what he had done, to remember the life he had destroyed. When photos of Laura were shown on the screen, smiling and full of life, even some jurors looked away. The prosecutors ended their argument with a single sentence written in David's journal: "If I can't have her, no one will." Those words lingered in the air like a confession. The jury took only a few hours to reach their decision. David McMillan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, David didn't flinch. He didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even speak. He simply stared ahead, his expression blank. For the first time, the courtroom felt colder, as if everyone realized they were looking at a man completely hollowed out by his own darkness. After the sentencing, reporters interviewed neighbors and colleagues who were still trying to make sense of it all. Some said David had always been a bit intense, but no one believed he was capable of violence. Others admitted that they had noticed the couple's growing distance, but never thought it could end in murder. People wanted to understand how a man so ordinary could commit something so monstrous. But there was no clear answer. The transformation had been gradual, a slow erosion of trust, empathy, and reason until only obsession remained. In the days following the trial, Laura's sister released a statement to the media. She said that her sister had believed love could fix anything, even when it hurt. She urged others to recognize the warning signs of control disguised as affection, to leave before fear becomes fatal. Her words resonated with thousands of viewers across the country, sparking conversations about emotional manipulation and the hidden dangers that can live inside a relationship. Meanwhile, in prison, David's silence continued. He refused interviews, avoided other inmates, and spent most of his time writing in notebooks that no one was allowed to read. Guards described him as calm but distant, as if he existed in a world entirely his own. Some said he looked haunted. Others said he looked content. But outside those prison walls, the story of David and Laura McMillan became a grim reminder that love can turn toxic when it's rooted in control. What had begun as a fantasy between two people trying to save their marriage had spiraled into a deadly obsession. The tragedy was not just that Laura lost her life, but that she had never realized how close danger was. Sleeping beside her every night. Months passed after David McMillan's sentencing, but the story didn't fade from public memory. It became one of those cases that people whispered about in cafes and online forums, a cautionary tale of love warped by obsession. The name David McMillan was now synonymous with control, manipulation, and murder. For most, the story had ended with his conviction. But for investigators, there were unanswered questions, small inconsistencies that refused to stay buried. During a post-trial audit of evidence, detectives revisited David's electronic records. What began as routine data archiving turned into something far more disturbing. On one of his external hard drives, buried deep in a folder labeled Projects, they found encrypted files. When decrypted, the contents revealed hundreds of saved messages, photos, and screenshots. It wasn't just of Laura. It was of multiple couples and women he had met online through relationship forums. Some were conversations dating back years. Long before Laura's death, the messages revealed a chilling pattern. David had been using online spaces to connect with couples interested in open relationships or trust experiments. He portrayed himself as experienced, offering advice and even encouraging others to explore dangerous boundaries. In many cases, those relationships eventually fell apart, often after David had inserted himself into their personal lives as a mentor or friend. He seemed to feed off the chaos he caused, collecting every message, every reaction. Like trophies, detectives realized this wasn't about one moment of jealousy. It was part of something larger and deeply calculated. David's obsession with control had been festering long before Laura's murder. They began contacting some of the people from those old conversations. Many were shocked to learn that the man they knew as Daniel M., or Truthseeker_74, was actually a convicted murderer. A few admitted that their relationships had fallen apart after interacting with him. Some even described feeling manipulated or emotionally drained by his influence. For Laura's family, the revelation was another blow. It meant that David's darkness wasn't born from a single mistake. It had been there from the beginning, quietly shaping every part of their marriage. Her sister couldn't stop wondering how much of Laura's life had been real and how much had been a performance crafted by David to maintain his control. The discovery painted him not as a man who snapped, but as one who had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation. News of these findings reignited public interest. Documentaries and podcasts revisited the case, digging deeper into David's psychology. Experts described him as a narcissist with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, someone who craved dominance disguised as emotional connection. His pattern followed the same rhythm: attraction, control, suspicion, and destruction. Laura had been the final piece, the moment when his need for control collided with reality and turned fatal. Inside prison, David remained mostly silent. He ignored interview requests but continued writing in his notebooks daily. When one of the guards confiscated a notebook during a random inspection, it contained chilling reflections. He wrote about creating loyalty through fear, about how trust was the most fragile form of control. He even mentioned other names, people investigators later traced back to the couples from his files. He seemed proud of what he had done, viewing himself as a kind of puppeteer who had revealed people's true selves. When excerpts from the notebook were leaked to the press, the public reaction was outrage mixed with disbelief. Many had thought of David as a man driven mad by jealousy. Few had considered that he might have always been this way. The story evolved from one about a crumbling marriage to one about a predator hiding behind the mask of a husband. For Laura's family, closure remained impossible. Her sister often spoke about how her greatest regret was believing that love could change someone who refused to change themselves. She founded a small organization in Laura's name, focused on helping those in emotionally controlling relationships recognize the signs before it's too late. Her speeches were quiet but powerful. She would often say, "Control doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like care." Years later, when a documentary about the case premiered, it ended not with Laura's death, but with a montage of her life before David, her laughter, her artwork, her friendships. The final narration reminded viewers that behind every story of control, there is a person who believed in love until it became a weapon. David McMillan lived out his days behind concrete walls, still writing, still silent. His notebooks filled shelf after shelf in his small cell, each page proof of a mind that could twist affection into possession. He never expressed regret, never accepted guilt. For him, everything was about control, even in the end. But outside those walls, Laura's story became more than a tragedy. It became a warning. It reminded people that obsession doesn't appear suddenly. It grows quietly, disguised as devotion, until it becomes something deadly. In the end, David's fantasy had taken everything from him, including the very thing he claimed to want most: love.